If there are any lingering questions actually from last week, I think I might tonight, as I try to describe and show you that ineffable property of art, of whatever composition is, and go through some of the rules, if you were, but take it directly to your iPhone and show you which one of the parts of the application you need to use to achieve these. The question of composition and what it is in art, I suppose you'd have to say it's part of it is the displacement of where you put the elements together in a picture, in a piece of music. People talk about balance, whatever that is. And in the visual arts, I would say composition is a way of guiding the viewer's eye, maybe, towards the most important elements of your work. But the basic criteria is, what do you want to do with it? Why take the picture? I mean, that's a very simple question. Why even bother to take a picture? The goal of good composition is to help express whatever the idea is that you're trying to achieve. And again, what is an idea? And there are many rules of what some of the ways of achieving this are. But I think also that one of the things that can be done with these cameras now, with these iPhones, is not just why are you taking it, but you want to record reality. You want to actually take an image of what's going on out there, even if it's to take a picture of a document. But beyond that, what is the difference between a good photograph and a bad, I shouldn't say a bad photograph, a non-good photograph? The first thing that I want to show you that you can do, and this is directly with the camera, and I didn't spend enough time on this last time. I'm going to be using an iPhone, but it's identical on your Android phones, and that is of where you place the focus and the brightness and the exposure when you go to take a picture. This should be the first thing that you do. And I won't be picking this up and carrying it around with me, so you're not going to be able to see actually anything else but my desk. But I think in this case that I can show you this. When you turn on your camera, one of the first things that you can do is tap the screen. Just tap the screen, and you're going to see either in an Android or on an iPhone a box. In some of the phones and some of the apps, you'll have a box and a circle. The box can represent the focus, or it can also represent the exposure. And if you have a box and a circle, take that and you can move that box around. I am going to pick it up because I want to show you in a larger area, don't get dizzy, how that changes. If you want the exposure, for example, here's very high light. If I press, you see that? My finger there, it's going to give you the best exposure for what's out there in that bright area. If you want to bring out the detail and the actual focus of your attention, the person, the thing that you want to have exposed correctly, you go like that. On the side of this, you'll also notice that there is a little sun. You can change that sun and it will change the exposure so that you get the optimum exposure. This is very, very useful for taking portraits. Go right up to the subject matter and hit the box, and then if it's not exactly right, you can change the exposure. This is very, very useful in bright sunlight. I'm going to put this back. It's very useful in bright sunlight because very often the subject matter, when you're taking pictures of children, it's going to be washed out in the sunlight. This is the way to correct that. is to take that box, and you can also make the box larger and place it anywhere in there that you want the detail. There's a shadow area. That's what I want to show you. This is a desk. I want to show you the texture there. I'm also going to show you tonight a group of photographs. Some of them are going to be my own. Some of them are from tutorials, which are much easier to use. And for you to, I'll give you references to it, to try to take these examples of what makes up a composition. What are the rules? There are certain rules, and everyone says, you know, the cliche is these rules are meant to be broken. But these are established visual rules that will help you take better pictures. The first one that you hear of all the time is the rule of thirds. On your camera, I'm going to bring you back now to this to show you the rule of thirds. And we're going to go back and share the screen.
And Ron, while you bring that up, we had a couple of questions about what you were doing it before. So I'm not trying to interrupt your train of thought with the rule of thirds, but just let me know when you're ready for a couple of questions. I'm saving them until you're ready.
Yep. Let me get this back, and I'll do this quickly, and then we'll take the questions. I did want to show people this.
Absolutely.
And here we go. You can see the grid right now on my camera. And this breaks your screen up into, quote, thirds. You can see the thirds. There are 3 rows, and they're breaking up into different areas. The thirds, the areas that you're supposed to put your subject, is up in one of the intersecting spots on your grid. Now, you don't have to do this all the time. I won't get into the psychology of why this works. But that demonstrates the rule of thirds. It's a good idea to turn your grid on anyway, because it's going to help you keep the horizon level. So I suggest that you find where the grid is. I'll show you on an iPhone. I think you'll find it in other places also. And this is the, quote, rule of thirds. Okay, questions? Yes.
There were some questions about, let's see, the most recent question was how to get the grid to show up on an Android. So I don't know if you know how to do that, if you got tips.
Yes. The problem with my showing you Android is that every single Android manufacturer, almost all of them, have different software. Yeah. So if I show you on a Samsung, I'm not going to be able to show you on, Microsoft still makes them, on a different make of Android camera. What I suggest you do is go online, just Google very simply, download the manual for your particular camera. It'll take you right to it. Go to the manual, download the manual, and do a search. And just put, I mean, I can do it, but I don't want to take up time and show you in 2 seconds. Google it.
Yep.
Go ahead.
And in some simple, some basic tips, I just looked for settings on my phone and was able to find, I was on an Android here, and was able to find something to display grid lines. So you can probably dig through the settings and look for something that says grid lines to be able to find that too, to get the thirds. So
it's fairly easy to find it.
Yep. Other questions. There was also a question about how to get the dot to move up and down that's beside the box. So I think it was when you were showing, because when you talk about it, maybe you could just show your phone again. It was about changing the focal point and what gets the, where your light settings, I think, are being set.
Well, I was just doing that.
What you were doing, exactly. How you were using your finger just to literally tap on the screen and tap on the different parts.
That's all I was doing. Just turning on my phone, tap on the screen. That's it. And I think in all Android phones, and I know, of course, in the iPhone, that it'll work. All you have to do is just turn it on, go to photo, and tap on the screen. And you'll see the boxes. Now, you may have, I've seen this on some Android phones, that you can separate the circle and the square. Find out, it's very easy, which is which. whether that's the focus or whether it's the exposure. You'll see something turn light and dark if it's the circle, or the same thing with the square. But those are the two elements there of the camera that you can use right away.
The final question was just a general one about if you have any preferences. Since we're talking about using iPhones versus Androids, if somebody doesn't have one, if you would steer them one way or the other, and what you would look for if you were buying a phone for the camera features.
Personally, poisonally, I have an top of the line. I have an iPhone. Why? Because I teach with the knife. I do this. A good friend of mine has an LG 4 that's one half the price. That's just a marvelous phone. If you don't have an Apple system, I would think that you could get a very, very good smartphone for $300 to $400. Very good, very good. The top line is now an $1,100 phone. It's either from Samsung or from Apple. And what you're paying for is multiple lenses. The Apple and the Samsung both have 3 lenses. Your $300 phone will only have 1 lens. And if you want to enlarge, you've got to, move your fingers along on your screen. But what's going to happen is you're going to get grain. You're going to get a lot of grain there because you don't have 3 different lenses. Excuse me. Any others?
So yes, there's some people putting in out love for Google Pixels. People really love those. There's questions if there's any phones you would avoid. And then we'll circle around. There's another technical question about how you do something. So it sounds like you would avoid things that you can't afford. That's always a good idea.
And
be realistic. I mean, any phone that we get is going to be better than what we were shooting with 10 years ago. But yeah.
Even down to there are some Chinese. There are some phones that you can get for $150. Very simply, go out. Go to Micro Center, go to wherever they're selling these, go into T-Mobile or any place, take a picture and send it to yourself and mail it to yourself, and you'll see. I haven't seen any really bad phones anymore. They're extraordinary. The video capabilities of $300-400 phones are the equivalent of what used to be video movie cameras 10 years ago, 5 years ago.
Great. So the last technical question was, when you were showing the iPhone, and I'm sorry, I think I was looking at questions when you were doing it, somebody said that they saw a yellow box and that you were making that yellow box bigger and smaller.
What I was doing was, there was a little sun, a little bitty yellow dot, and I was moving that up and down because that changed the exposure. It changed the brightness. You don't have that necessarily on different Android phones. That is particular to Apple's photo app.
And so a more recent photo app too. I don't think all Apples even have that.
No, they don't. They don't.
Okay.
And if you have an Apple on i6, which is, they're down now to $350, they're very good. I don't think you'll have the full capabilities, although they do use the same software. So let me roll on with some of the rules of composition, but then I've got to show you. I think that's obviously the best thing to do.
And if people have additional questions, they can ask, and I'll just keep track of questions, and we can return and do some more questions later. Thanks, Ron.
So another characteristic is balance, whatever that is. You're trying to have balance from one side of the picture to the other. I'll show you this. Leading lines, patterns, and symmetry. I'm going to show you an entire set of photographs that just illustrate what we mean by patterns and symmetry. Framing the subject, cropping the subject. That's one of the first things that you can do, is get everything that isn't germane, that isn't relative to your picture, to your intention, get it out. You can do that at the beginning by zooming in, Or the best way that all photographers used to work before zoom lenses, get close. Your feet are your zoom lens. And try to get out of the frame all the elements that do not lend to your intention. What is your intention? What is it that you want to bring there? Do you have a story? You can start that way too. And what you want to do is frame the subject, crop the subject, and try to create a focus. And I think from here on in, I'm going to just try to show you each one of these elements. There were some other terms that I had used last time that all lend themselves to a good composition. And as I go through this, if you have questions, for example, what is brilliance? What is contrast? How do you achieve that? I think the best thing to do is to go through it, try to show this to you, and then show you what particular controls of your camera you need to use to achieve these. There was one other question that came up that I think is important for this because I'm going to use it. And that is, again, HDR photography, which is high dynamic range, which is going to mean, and I'll show you this, a very high level of contrast so that there are differences in the photograph of color, of brilliance, but there's detail all the way through the photograph. What your camera will do when you set it to HDR is take anywhere from 3 to 7 photographs. Bang, bang, bang. It'll take a picture of each one of the brightness elements, put them all together so that every part of your picture is in correct exposure. Now, I'm going to go from here. It'll take me a minute, and I want to bring up some of these examples for you. So we will go here, and I will go to screen share. All right. Now, you can see my screen, yes?
Yes, we see your screen, Ron.
Okay. This is an example of the rule of thirds and what that means. If you can think of it that your screen is divided into a grid and that the key points are where that grid and the lines intersect. Again, I can't tell you exactly what it is, the way the brain works, but if you put something in the exact center of a picture, the brain isn't sure where to go. Does you go to the right, you go to the left, you say in the center. You can experiment with this by putting a grid on your screen. That is the rule of thirds. I won't get into the golden ratio because I never understood it. Leading lines, this is a very good example of what composition people talk of, leading lines, where there is something in the picture or a line or some part of the elements that lead you to the focal point of your image or what you want to lead to, which is obvious, in this case, the woman's face. Diagonals are another part of a picture that you can have. I'll show you this. But again, using diagonal lines to lead the eye to the center of your attention. That's the key, is what is the center of your attention? What do you intend to do with the photograph? Why did you take the photograph? What is the reason? It must exist for a reason. It can be a throwaway image, a family snapshot, or just a work of art. But what is the vision? What is the purpose of it? And these are some of the elements that go back hundreds of years of what to use. This is another technique to use. It's called the frame within a frame. And this works because it gives a boundary to your image. Now, sometimes you can do this merely with some trees or putting somebody between two elements, or even in a doorway will work. A little clue to make your pictures better immediately is, first of all, I've said this before, stop your subjects from smiling. It's almost, you'll almost never see a, quote, good portrait by a good portrait, one that's sold, one that's taken of people, or even if you go to a very good photographer to have pictures taken, it's rare that you're going to have someone smiling. Avoid sunlight if you can, and the best way to immediately start to take really good portraits is to use incident light. Take your subject and put them in a window with incident light, not sunlight falling on them. You're going to see an immediate change to the better in your portraits.
What do you mean by incident light, Ron? I'm sorry, but what does that mean?
By incident light, I mean not direct sunlight. Usually light that's coming through a window that isn't direct. And this is called sometimes figure to ground, but this is the most popular element these days in the taking of photographs. And it's this area right here that they've improved the smartphone cameras the most. It's right here. And what you're doing is you're getting your subject matter and you're getting in close and you're throwing the background out of focus. And this is very difficult to do if you don't have direct control over the aperture. If you open your lens up all the way, your depth of field is reduced so that when you focus on the person's face, the rest of the picture is out of focus and does not take away your attention. Most of the cameras these days, when you go to the portrait setting, are automatically going to try to throw that background out of focus. There's a Japanese term called bokeh. I think it's spelled B-O-K-E-H, but that's what it means. That everything except the element of focus is going to be blurred. And you can see how effective that is. The closer you get, the more the area that isn't in focus will be blurred. So if you're going to take a picture of somebody or of something, get as close, fill the frame. By filling the frame, you're not going to only have the attention of the person's face, but you're also going to take away the elements of the frame that don't lend anything to the picture. If that background is supposed to lend anything, I'll show you that. If it's supposed to lend something, then you can keep it. How do you keep it? Take it off of portrait and get back a little bit. Again, this seems like common sense, but it works well, is to fill your frame with the subject matter. And here again, by filling the frame and coming closer to the subject, the building behind it, which is made up of geometric objects that could be very, very distracting, is even in sunlight, even in high light, thrown out enough to make your subject matter stand out from the background. I'm not sure about this, but again, some rules of composition are if there's a dominant eye, place that dominant eye in the center of the photograph. Again, she's not smiling. I have to say that. This is probably one of the more difficult things to do, and I'll show you how effective this can be, and that is to look for patterns. Everywhere in your photograph, look for some kind of a pattern there that either repeats or lends itself to either a background or sometimes even to the foreground, and repetition within the frame. And then what we call symmetry and asymmetry. I'm not sure if you can do this that easily, consciously or not. But there is such a thing as symmetry and asymmetry. Sometimes it's just something very simple. An example, you're going to take a picture of a dish of food. If you get down close enough, you're going to have the forms of the food itself, which won't be falling into a background of tables and silverware and napkins, and it will be in itself pleasing because there is a certain symmetry very often to pieces of fruit, to food, to a prepared meal. And these are some here of the examples of, and I'm going to stop the share now, of some of the rules of composition. Are there questions right now about any of those rules before we get on and show you a group of other photographs that I hope will illustrate this?
I'm certainly monitoring and watching for questions. The only recent question was if there may be some possibility to share pictures with each other and have you comment on them. And so you and I talked about that ahead of time, and we still need to figure out, I think in the next week, we'll be ironing out exactly how we're going to do that so we can do that in the fourth and final session. So.
Yes, I didn't want to do that at the beginning because we're trying to keep these sessions somewhat open so that if someone hasn't been in a session. But I think that we can do that anyway in the next class and just have people take pictures, and we'll use them as here are student pictures. Let's do some critique of them with either what we know or just from the way we feel about them and why they set up like that.
Great. The one question did come in. Somebody was asking for a definition of negative space. And I can't remember which of those rules you talked about negative space, but obviously you can do a lot playing with it. So why don't you explain what the concept is and then what you think about its use in composition? Would you like me to take a stab at explaining?
Yeah, why don't you take a stab? Go ahead.
Okay. When I think of negative space, my like the first image that comes to my mind is the classic where it's just, those black and white diagrams. I could find one and probably share it, where you look at it and you see either a vase or you see two faces looking at each other.
Yeah, that's the definition.
That's the classic. So if you look at, the white is the two faces looking at each other, and the black in the center is the vase. And so it depends on what focus your eye takes. I can look and see if I can find an example to share. You probably could too, Ron.
Yeah, I'm doing. I can do it right now. In fact, let me just show you right now.
But that's really classic. And then there's lots of ways you can play. So like with framing, there's obviously, that space in the frame.
Can you see that?
Space there. Yep, absolutely.
Okay.
So
I would say this about negative space also. It's contrast very often. You can have negative space. It doesn't have to necessarily be black and white. You can... It's not a great term to use because it isn't neutral. It's not necessarily negative, but it gives you a sense of contrast, I think. All right, now let's try to share a screen, and I've collected a group of pictures that I hope will start to illustrate. You can see that. I can't. It's this picture is showing right now.
Yep, we see that picture, the couple on the beach.
Right.
Yep.
I wanted to give you an example of where with this term where HDR really is the high dynamic range of how to use it and how it can work. This is a photograph as the sun is going down over Boston in the background. The sun itself is coming through the trees, and there's a couple sitting here, and you can see actually that the sun was actually reflecting off of my iPhone from the lens, because on the woman's hair, you see that little octagon there? That very often indicates that you're taking a picture into the sun, which is a rule that you should never, that's a rule you shouldn't break. You can break it. If you set your camera on high dynamic range, you'll find it, HDR. What it did was it took a photograph of the sun. So it focused on the sunlight. It brought down the brightness so that you can almost see the detail behind it. And then it took a photograph of the water, and then it took a picture of the trees, and then it took a picture of the couples. Each time the camera took a picture, it exposed and focused that element quote correctly. If you take a look at that tree over on the right-hand side, you can actually see detail in the bark because the camera went out on its own when you set it for HDR and took a picture of that also and exposed it correctly. You might say, well, how come? How can it put the thing together and not have it out of focus and jittery, because you can never hold the thing steady for 5 exposures? That's the beauty of the computer. That's what the software in the Apple and the iPhone and now almost all phones can do. And then again, you can see all of the detail there in the grass. There is one problem with this. I don't know if anyone's noticing it. It's unnatural. This is reality, but nothing is reality in art anyway. I mean, every lens that you choose changes the perspective of the picture. You can make somebody look bad by just waiting until they grimace. So but what happens with HDR, if you keep it set for too long, you're going to start to get a rather unnatural vision from your pictures. So I would be a little careful of it, but it's marvelous for what you can do. Now, other elements of photography. If you're going to take a picture of a plant or a flower, what you want to do is first ask yourself, what's the center of my attention? What am I trying to do here? And what you're trying to do here is to expose the bright areas for the elements that you want to, how shall I focus on? This is the purpose of it. Notice in the top right-hand corner, anything that isn't in that sunlight is going to go out to dark. It gives you contrast, and the form of this bush is what becomes the center of attention. Again, you fill your frame. So there are very few elements within something like this that detract from your attention. Again, sometimes you may not want anything but just form. This is a photograph taken in a swimming pool. And if you see these different elements, and there's a balance here. Also, that line that goes through the picture, it's very nice to be able to take a photograph and then describe it later, because it could be accidental. But that line that goes through it from the pole draws your eye right through there. The contrast of the yellow at the top gives you, again, I wouldn't say negative space, but a balance to the reflection of the umbrella in the water and the yellow there at the top. These are some of the elements of composition. I want to show you another very good example of how to use high dynamic range. This is a photograph taken as the sun is down, it's gone down. So it's very, very dark in the foreground, and it's still quite bright at the top. And what you can see is that there's definition and detail in almost all the different parts of this photograph. Again, the use of line draws your eye in, gives you a sense of balance in the foreground, and even the vertical poles, as opposed to the horizontal lines, gives you a sense of balance. These are composition. This one, I think, I put this in for one reason. As an example of how good these cameras are and how good what you can do with your smartphone. This photograph was taken at night through the window of Lincoln Center out into the street. And what's absolutely incredible is that these cameras can actually pick up detail almost everywhere in this image. I think you can almost see people down there in the bottom right-hand corner in a window. And believe it or not, I don't think you could get something like this with a $1,500, $2,500, $30,000 with any other kind of camera. It's absolutely astounding what the computer can do, and you should use your camera more and more in situations that you don't think anything is going to come out. And this was not that manipulated either. It was astounding. Again,
Ron, there's a question. Somebody was looking at their HDR settings, and they're seeing on, off, and enhanced. So you've covered HDR, and I did a quick search, and I found there's like HDR plus versus HDR enhanced, and there's a whole like school
where
of
is
thought
where
about
is this?
This is I found it on Reddit, where it was HDR versus HDR plus enhanced, and what they were saying there was it was about moving subjects and how HDR plus was better if you had. Let's see. It says if the subject stands still and you have all the time in the world, that's a good time to use the enhanced. But if you just have a moving subject like something, then that's when you use HDR plus. So I think this may be with Google Pixels.
I have not heard of it, but I would always love to have anything that's enhanced. That's good. A shirt, an enhanced shirt. I don't know. I'm sure that somehow they've tweaked the computer so that it will take the elements of the picture and give you even more contrast. Well, I mean, something like this. This is a still, okay? And this was set at HDR, and you can see again the range of detail and light that you can start to get. If this was taken with a regular camera, without a computer in it, without HDR, you would have lost detail either in the sky or the foreground would have been completely black. I don't know what enhanced, how much more. Maybe what it does is it gives you a greater degree of resolution. By that I mean of definition by sharpening the image more. Balance and just form. Balance and form. The subject matter is the man's face, really, or it can be the camel's head. The point is, there's a triangle there. There's the shadow on the right side, there's the image of the camel right in the middle, and then down there at the bottom, this was very fortuitous because that bright blue gives you also contrast to the brown of the background. This is part of composition. We threw on this also a frame around it, and you can play with these. I'll show you how to get different framing applications if you wanted to do it. But it does give you a border, a sense, and that's really why people frame their photographs if they're going to hang them on the wall. But this is a good example of composition to the point of having a certain degree of balance and control over your picture, over the image that you're taking. Let's see another example of. I wanted to also show that you can do with the panorama, and you can also get a sense of balance and exposure. You can also do HDR and combine it with panorama. That's what this is. So the high definition resolution gives you detail in the foreground, and the clouds stand out and aren't washed out. Leading lines. The main subject, which is either the violin or that smile, I wouldn't call that a smile, that face is placed where we would say is the rule of thirds. There are elements behind which are, in this case, architectural, and the case leads your eye right up to the main subject matter. We're not interested in the money that's in the case. We're interested in the person sitting on the street, but the case is a part of this picture and gives you a certain degree, a sense of the entity of the whole photograph itself. This is a wonderful example. That's a photograph of a town in Mexico taken from a hill. And all that the basic aesthetic sense of this is the geometric form and all of those colors and contrasts that lend itself to something that goes beyond just showing you a group of buildings. And that, again, is part of your framing, and it's part of looking for form. Again, an example of how much better a photograph often is with natural light falling on the subject so that it doesn't get washed out. You have a neutral background that's almost out of focus in the top left, and the person is not even looking into the camera. And it gives you what you would call eventually some kind of portrait. Try it. Take somebody and turn their face to the side, put them in a window, and people are going to start to see, well, that's a real portrait. And it works also by not using absolute sunlight or direct light. It gives a softness to skin color. Again, the use of what we call definition is an example here, whereby having absolutely everything in as great, as fine a focus as you could do. There's a lot of elements in this picture. First of all, the background is not, this is not HDR. So you let the background go out so it's darker and doesn't detract. The bird's head, incidentally, happens to be at one of those intersecting lines, but you don't do this consciously after a while. And the color and the definition gives you, again, a sense of where the subject is. And if you notice something else about it, I don't know how this worked, but the water is running beneath it. And because of the use of a very, very slow shutter speed, all the definition that would have come from the water and the sparkling water is used as a softened background, because of with a slow shutter speed, you're going to get the sense of the water moving. So these again are elements of composition. This is a straight example of composition, where you have here vertical lines, different colors. You have contrast between the brights and the whites and the dark at the top. And these elements, hopefully in good composition, will come together and give you something that somewhere in your own mind makes you think of something that is not just a snapshot. This is one other very good example. I want to keep using these of HDR. And the way that you'll do this is when you go to take a picture, a photograph when you're traveling. One of the rules of thumb always is the best time to take photographs, and it really is an hour before sunrise and an hour after sunrise. But sunrise and sunset are going to give you extraordinary definition within the picture because the light is coming from the side. The problem can be that you're going to have excessive shadow, and unless you want to show that shadow, then you can use this HDR to bring out detail and color in all of the different parts of the photograph. There's an idea, that's another part of composition, is that it's the ability of the photographer to communicate with the, with the viewer, to tell a story through the composition. The lighting, it all works to this, but every photo exists for a reason. So every element within that picture, that's composition, and there's a vision behind it. So there's a story here. There's obviously the object of the story is the man who is standing at the phone booth. But there are elements in that photograph, the horizontal lines, and then including that painting of the woman who is, if you look at her, she's got her back to him, and she's looking at something, and it gives you a certain sense of aloneness, of loneliness. There's a vision within that photograph. You might have to stop and wait for a long time to get this, but if you're thinking of that, you might be able to do that kind of a thing. And again, having something lead into the picture, that always does it. So that there's an element that leads you immediately into the photograph. Let me stop there for a minute or two and see what questions or comments you might have.
So I'd certainly encourage folks to ask questions. There's been a couple that have come through. One person was wondering how you would achieve a slow shutter speed on a phone.
That is a very, very good question.
And maybe we should, before we even get into that, for people who don't know why you'd want to do that, maybe you could even find an example
good
or show people what it looks like, and then we can talk about how to do it.
A slow shutter speed is going to give you a sense of motion that you intend. If you use a slow shutter speed and your subject moves, they're going to be blurred. If you want them to be blurred, you use a slow shutter speed. Or if you want to take a picture in very low light, you've got to get your camera up on a tripod so it's steady, get it down to 1/8 of a second. Now you're asking, how do you do this? That's next week. The way that you do this is that there are applications that you can either buy or are free, and I'll show you these, that allow you to manually control your smartphone the same way you used to be able to control your film camera 15 years ago. And what it allows you to do is to set the camera manually so that you can then have a slower shutter speed, wider aperture, and have even much greater control. I used a slow shutter speed with the picture of the bird because I wanted the water to be flowing. Now, the next question comes, how can you hold an iPhone or a smartphone so that it doesn't shake? It's got built into it a little gyroscope. And those little gyroscopes, I forget what they're called. You can turn it on or off. It prevents shake. What it does is it allows you to handhold your camera now to speeds that you could never, ever achieve before. I mean, down to sometimes as slow as a half a second to almost a second. And that little gyroscope inside is going to keep the lens, believe it or not, or the image plane vibrating and moving counter to the motion of the shake of your hand. And there's a setting on your camera that will, in some cameras, allow you to do this. It should be almost automatic. When you get your iPhone, it's set to do this.
I remember finding, and I haven't used it recently, but a really cool setting on an iPhone where with an image that you captured as a live photograph, you could swipe up and things that were moving in the live photograph, you could actually apply different effects to. And I had great luck using that on a waterfall where I would swipe up and you could do loops, you could do all sorts of things with the animation, or you could just blur it and get this great, kind of soft water feel, which is something that you get with a long exposure otherwise. And they did it just by taking, that live video and compressing it. And that was a really kind of cool trick too.
Yeah. Other questions before we go and try to show some of the other elements of composition here.
So the other question was just a comment about the sign. There was no parking sign in the last shot of the man who's on the phone with the painting of it. And I think just calling out that was a very interesting textural element. I didn't know if you had any additional thoughts about it.
Yeah, no, I did. I wanted it in there because it shows somebody in a little wheelchair, and your eye gets drawn to that. It's sort of, obviously this is not a picture of a happy man calling home somehow. That was the intention of the photograph to begin with. And having a picture of a diagram of a wheelchair, I thought would be part of the element of the idea of the picture.
And apparently there was a no parking sign as well, which would drive
Yeah.
that home too. It's like, you can make a call, but you can't stay here. Yeah. Yeah, it's really true.
All right, we will
Well,
go
people are
on.
enjoying it. Let's continue. Let's look at some more
Let's
pictures.
continue. I want to do now, and one of the elements of composition that's always brought up is, do you have a theme? Do you have an idea? Do you have one central idea when you go out with your camera? What do you want to do today? What do you want to take pictures of? What do you want to, do you want to sit there in Boston Common and just sit on a bench and take photographs of people going by? And the elements of just sometimes you don't need human subjects, you don't need a panorama, just form sometimes and design alone can do this. And I'll give you some, let's see, we got to go back. Can you see that?
Yep, we see that. It looks like a whole lot of rust. Absolutely.
There it is.
Cool.
Pure design, absolute design. And try, sometimes when you see something, it may not have any reason, but it's just the design and the repetition and the color alone that that gives us this. And one of the elements that you can use with your own camera in this particular scene, the clarity and the definition. If you can see every little gear, and the sharpness, which is, again, absolutely incredible of what you can do with a little bitty smartphone. But again, just pure design. That's as you're walking along a wall, again, with design. And eliminating as much as you can any elements of your composition that might be detracting from it. You can do this on a walk through, try it sometime. Just go to Boston, go to Quincy. I'll tell you something to do. I don't know where you live. Go to Boston now and see. The city has changed. Take a bike ride through. It's like we're living in an apocalypse. The stores are all boarded up now on Newbury Street. And all of a sudden, you can find images that you were never able to see before, find before in a major city. I think New York is probably the same kind of thing. And it doesn't have to, this is the hood of a car. This is the rusted hood of a car. Again, pure design, pure color, pure line. Graffiti, but then adding something to that graffiti, to the background. And the woman's face down in the bottom sort of fits in with the elements, the rest of the picture. You may not think so, but it works that way. Again, just pure design, just a wall as you're walking along. You get closer, you'll eliminate most of the elements that don't add to it. Who took this has no idea what's up there in the dark area on the top, because the exposure is thrown out and the white in the top left doesn't detract from it. Again, just walking along streets sometimes in a city, and the different colors of the buildings and the graffiti alone sometimes are worth the look. This was really fun. I don't know how many of you saw this when it was in Boston, on the, what's it called? The Greenwood in the middle of the city where they took down the highway,
That's the Rose Kennedy Greenway?
Yeah. And I forget the artist's name. She's wonderful. And she put up this wonderful set of almost parachute cloth across the green. And the art itself was reflecting in one of the tall buildings that line the green, and there was the composition within that. Again, it uses probably 4 or 5 of the different rules of composition. Doesn't necessarily have to use them, but it does with the diagonals, with the contrast in the colors. And these are just examples of what you can do. And the other thing is just simplify. Just get close to something that would never be a picture, never be a composition. You're walking along the street, take your iPhone and just aim it at the sidewalk. You'll be amazed at what you can get, especially the closer you get. Here's another example. This is the derailleur of a bicycle on a street. By coming in close on it, you eliminate what's distracting and just concentrate on the pure form itself. Again, getting close. Your iPhone has the ability to take almost macro photographs. By that I mean close up, you don't have to do anything. And if you're not close enough and you have a phone with two lenses, move to the telephoto lens. Again, this is an example of what you can take from the mundane and make into something that has form, it has texture. That's a woman sitting on a chair in a boat. That's her, I don't know if you can even see what it is. That's her shoulder, that's her bathing suit, that's the red bathing suit, and the yellow is the covering of the jacket. You've taken what would have been a mundane subject and looked purely at the form, whatever the form is, and using color to show that kind of contrast in the form itself. Indoors in a concert hall, just putting together the forms alone, simplicity. In this case, there's a real balance there. I don't know if it was consciously done, but you can see from the larger elements in the top down to the screen, so they sort of lead down there, even though it's very small, to the piano. This one is a good illustration. Just walking along the street. That's the rear light of an automobile. And there's an aesthetic sense of composition in a lot of the world that you may not be aware of. And this is one way of doing that. Again, a reflection in a mirror. So these are the cases of the ways. Again, this was just in a puddle. There was some oil in it. And this is what you can do. It has no meaning in itself. It's not a picture of anyone. It's not a photograph of some place that you've visited. And again, the more and more that you can do of just pure form, that's actually the gearings of a clock in Cambridge, and it still works. The form of it, the color was incredible.
I'm not seeing any questions come through, but I'm wondering how much of those photos that you were just looking at, were those the original? Were they, I mean, you can do so much with cropping and taking something that you've photographed and changing even in some ways the composition by what you choose to take out after the effect.
There's the Photoshop cheat. There's what we'll get to hopefully next time, and the time after is post-production. And it's not, people used to say it's cheating. You can't tell if the photograph is real or it isn't real. It's never real. A painting is never real. You're using paint. I mean, paint isn't real. Isn't somebody's face. And you've got to start with a good picture. I mean, let's face it, you couldn't start with that real light, the headlight, if the form wasn't there to begin with. If the color wasn't there so that you could intensify it, you're not going to get it. So you've got to start with something that has those elements, and then I hope I'll be able to show you how to use, we won't have that much time next time, but how to use these very special applications. And I'll even show you how to get Photoshop for free and download it to your cameras. Have your cameras ready or write down what I show, because a lot of these, what Photoshop does, what Adobe does, is wants you to get this for free so that maybe someday you'll buy one of their applications. But it's amazing what you can do. Yeah, a lot of this, I have to admit, I have to say, is finagled, is adjusted. But again, you could never get that image of that clock if you didn't have that to begin with. If you didn't go and have that angle that you're taking it at, no matter what you do, you're not going to get it.
So were those all your photographs, Ron, that you just shared?
Yeah,
so, that's fabulous.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Now these were from a magazine.
Okay.
And the reason that I could use these, because they all had one sense of purpose. They wanted just one set. I'll give you an example now of an idea.
I have a couple other questions when you have. We do have a couple other questions.
I'll take the questions.
Okay. One question is: is it preferable? Do you prefer landscape versus portrait? How do you decide which way to hold your phone?
I don't know. Okay, I'll show you. All right. I'll give you two examples right now. I'll give you a shot. Right. So the assignment is, if we had a whole course, the assignment is putting human beings, putting people together in museums, is to do an essay on the different museums and trying to also get the elements of some human beings interacting or being within that gallery. There's a vertical picture. And again, this is the interior of a museum. The lines in this particular case are vertical, and they're the strongest lines. And it's a sense of design, not necessarily of the art that's in the museum. So there's one idea. When you go out to take a picture, you're going to go take a walk in the woods. You want to be able to take the designs in tree trunks. You want to just focus that day on cat of nine tails, and that's all you do. And you have an idea, and there's people sitting there above a painting, and they're part of the picture. Again, this was horizontal. So there's a theme here. There's an idea there. And again, I wanted to use these just to show you something. These are smaller. The capabilities of your camera of your phone are extraordinary. The phone itself is capable of giving you straight detail, both in the highlights and sometimes also in the background of inside a museum. This is another example of composition, of the rule of thirds, I suppose you'd say, and of the elements leading to each other. And there it is there in a larger respect. And the people are interacting with it because there was a show going on of people dancing at the same time. And there they are. So this was a museum exhibit, but there were people actually, this was a video that was taken as it was going on. There's another example. As you're going, one of the beauties of the smartphone is you can now take candid photography that nobody used to be able to do without having a special case and sitting in a subway with the camera in your lap, or using a reflex camera and taking pictures of them without knowing that you're taking them. These days, nobody knows you're taking the picture because you could be just looking at your camera. At your phone. You just hold your phone up and talk into it while you're taking their picture. And again, I felt that these elements went together. That I showed you. Again, sometimes there are just elements that are geometric. And you can place them at different parts. Again, there's the rule of thirds. The background and the foreground are in focus, and there's nothing there. You wait until people leave. graffiti in an alley, graffiti on a building, and move around and try to get all of the different parts of the other parts of the building together so that it says something. This I wanted to use to show you the capability of the smartphone to capture detail in low light. And I think that you could probably use this. Now, the question came up that Clayton asked too. I've sharpened this in post-production, and I've sharpened it enough so that it doesn't deteriorate from it, but it brings out all of the different elements. But you can do this inside a building. You can do this in a bar. This was taken in a bar. The light's coming in from the right-hand side, and the light there is also, the detail is gone, but all of the elements of the shade come through. This is another example. I wanted to put a person in there. So there's the person at the top interacting with his own clothing. But there's an element of the subject themselves interacting within the mannequins, and then on the right side, the same thing. Those two people, that's the intention. Those two people, they're the focal point right there. And the contrast using black and white, I think works to this. The empty shirt on the right, beneath the picture of Elvis, it goes together to make a composition and say something about those two people. They're tourists, they're tired, she's not happy, he doesn't care. This was very, very fortuitous. This is the Martin Luther King museum in, where is this? I forget right now. Not Atlanta. It'll come to me.
Is that in Birmingham? Or?
Yeah. And there's one kid sitting there at this counter of mannequins, and he's the only live person there. But there's something about placing that live person within that picture. This was the theme. This was what it was supposed to do. And that was the intention of putting a live person in there to be part of that context. Again, people in a museum. All these people, the paintings in the background.
Ron, somebody asked a question as you're showing these pictures of people, and this is a great place to pause it. They're obviously fascinating. Like, I loved that picture of the couple with Elvis. Like, everybody was looking at the phone. It was fabulous. What about privacy? Do you ask permission of people when you take their photograph? Do you take their picture and show it afterwards? Do you just steal their image?
It's a very good question. The law is that anybody who is in a public space is fair game. You don't have to get their, what's it called, model release. On the other hand, if you're going to be selling that photograph and it has commercial use, when I say a professional photographer, I'm not making a living at this. So for me, it's not important that I get a model release because it may end up in a gallery, but it'll be changed enough, but it's not for publication necessarily. If you're really going to do this for a living, then carry model releases, go up to the people, say, I've taken your picture, get their email address, tell them that you'll send them a photograph, and most of the time they'll go along with it. When you're traveling, absolutely ask. And if someone sees you taking a picture of them, back off. The other answer is use a big telephoto lens. But yes, model release all the time.
Okay, thanks. Another question, which definitely relates to this question and to this picture here and a couple others, and but it's also related to the picture that you had of the machine earlier, and you talked about angles. I wonder if you could say a few words about what are our ideal angles for subjects, and especially I think, I think my kids, tell me that, everybody loves doing the top down angle and doing the selfie by holding the phone up and shooting down. It's more complimentary.
Yeah.
But maybe that's a tired angle too. What do you think? What kind of advice can you give on good angles for portraits?
The best advice is move around. before you take the picture, move around. And you'll find you're old enough to have a sense of aesthetics, not only of your own sense of aesthetics, but you've seen hundreds and thousands and millions of images. And by this time, you really start to get a sense of whatever that word good means. And you'll get a sense of it. And if there is a sense of composition that's based upon some innate kind of aesthetic, you'll know that that particular point of view is what you want to do. You know what the geometric forms are. If it fits one of the geometric forms, this is a pyramid. This is a triangle. Look for circles, and you'll find those elements within the photograph. This was very fortuitous. That is a painting. I can't remember the artist's name, but I think that he was sued recently for not treating his models well. Let's put it that way. And these are three people looking, I'll remember his name in a minute. This is the painting of him. And these are people standing in front of it, blocking it, but interacting with it so that it becomes another image. It becomes an image with human beings looking at the painting. And sometimes black and white, you can fool around and change it to that. Again, pure composition. That's the only way I could. This is taken in the ICA. And there's one place in Boston in the Museum of Contemporary Art. And it just, the different elements, the horizontals, the verticals, the different colors that contrast, go to make up what eventually, I suppose, defines a certain kind of composition. Again, simplification. People within a photo, within a picture. There's no people there. This was, I can't recall how this came about. It was in a museum, and somehow or other there was a blue background and there were people walking around in front of it. And the contrast and just the form of the people and the person on the right looking sort of into the picture gives it a very powerful effect of actual live people within that. This one, who knows how you look? I mean, just every face. None of them are looking at the camera. So nobody is particularly aware that somebody is taking their photograph at all. It just worked. How does it work? I think three of them have canes, have vertical canes that they're using. None of them are looking in. One's looking one way, another's looking another way, and they're sitting in a museum resting. And it gives you, there's a theme to it. There's an idea to this. Again, the kid's face. That's what you find. That's what you may be fortunate enough to wait around, or just pure form. When you go into a museum, this is the coat racks. Now you gotta go in and pull the coats off. No, you go into a room that doesn't have any coats hanging on it. Again, geometric form, composition, not the paintings. And how do you get this? You move around until the windows happen to line up like that within these squares. Again, the MFA downstairs, looking down in the MFA at the tables in the large atrium. This is real. This was taken in the museum in Portland, Maine. Got two names, it'll come to me in a moment. And there was a ballerina, there was a woman up on a catwalk, and she was part of the museum, but she was just practicing her ballet. And the silhouette is much more powerful than, I think, because it's a form, than details there of her face. Again, this kind of just form within a museum piece. And the camera, this is again the reflections. So this, as I say, all had some kind of sense of form. Again, a car museum. Get up close, wait for the light to be right, look for the elements, look for the texture. This was just pure luck. You had to be there. But again, there's an idea here somewhere. And this is marvelous. It's a mother, a grandmother, and a child going down the steps, probably in the MFA in Boston. But the point is to put human beings, put people into the museum itself, eliminate what doesn't belong there, and the lines will take you to the subject matter, to the main subject. There's
Ron, that last one, how is that framed? That was very different framing than almost looks like it was a picture on a glass. But
yeah, I'll show you.
Was that a post effect?
All of these frames are post effects, and believe me, the publisher didn't like them, and I just didn't have time to get rid of them for this. But you can play around with frames, and you go wild with them, and they felt it detracted. I agree now.
Ron, I have a question. As you're going about, this is fabulous, and I think we could all spend all night watching and looking and having commentary on your pictures. How would you suggest people who really want to practice, applying one of these themes? Do you just go and try to do it in every picture, or do you go out and say,
no,
okay, today I'm going to do this, so today I'm going to do, how do you go about developing an eye?
Go to a museum. Go to a museum. And instead of just concentrating on looking at the paintings or the pictures, look at the other elements that are there that in and of themselves have a sense of balance, of aesthetics. This is a good example. That is a corner in a museum with a wastebasket. And it just comes together. It just gives you a sense of the composition that you may not even know is going to be there. But if you wander around and look in the hallways, go to the bathrooms. They're always great. You're best off when there's no one in there.
I do not recommend taking pictures of people without their permission in bathrooms. That's a way to get in a lot of trouble.
But again, the silver, the just look for composition. Just look for painting. Look for paintbrushes. Go in and find out where people. Here you go. This is in one of the museums, and it's the children's room. And there's a mother and a daughter in the museum in a little children's workroom. And that's not what you would have gone there to see. Again. So
Ron, were all these photos that we were looking at, these were all taken with your phone?
Most of these, a lot of them were taken with the phone.
Yeah.
And since I'm illustrating composition right now, I didn't have all of them with the phone, but most of them. I know that most of them were. This one here is the interior of a cockpit in an airplane museum. And it really transforms it. Again, in an Airbnb, there's the other one I wanted. That's in a museum recently. That's just sitting there in a hallway I forget which museum, but there it is. And the most fortuitous, they were cleaning the floors at one of the installations at the MFA. This was taken with that. That's a real person. That's not part of the painting. All right, let me stop. I wanted to show again the interactions of the people in the museum looking at the paintings. And if you wait long enough, you're going to see in every gallery people looking at the paintings, interacting with the paintings. There's another gallery picture. All right. If there are questions, I've been trying to, I'm using, you know, what I have here too, to illustrate the different elements of composition. And we still have we have some minutes. I want to show you where to go to get some very, very good examples on your own. But let me stop here for questions.
So I think you're good, unless people want to take a moment to type some questions right now. There haven't been any new ones in these last couple of minutes. So I think we're good to show some people some examples. There was a comment earlier in which it appeared that instead of using a rule of thirds, that a picture was divided into fourths, which kind of sparks the question, you know, I wonder if you, yeah. Are there some favorite images that you can think of that do break the rules?
Almost all of them. You know, the rules are not, I think that the rules themselves grow out of the art. That the rules come after somebody builds a building and people like it. And then they say, let's use those techniques for the next building. And somebody makes a painting and someone likes this one and not another. It's the way the mind works. I'm sure there are different aesthetics in different cultures that have other rules. I'm not a painter, but I'm sure that there are other rules that you can say, that's Japanese. Well, why is it Japanese? What are the characteristics of paintings that are not Western? And then they become the rules for that particular type of painting. But they help you to start. They do help. If you say to somebody, get rid of stuff that doesn't belong there, that's enough.
Yeah, decluttering definitely helps.
Yeah.
That's a very good rule. Yeah.
Other questions now?
I'm not seeing any other questions right now. So let's show people some examples, and then people are just appreciating the quality of the photos and talk about how inspiring it is just to see, because I think so much of appreciating a good photo is also just like, how do we look at it? And this conversation I found personally really rewarding. So thank you.
Good. Let me get rid of this. I'm just going to show you something here that I want to bring up, and this will help you. Here it is. Okay. I'm going to now go back to the screen and show you something that you should start to do. Let's go here. Okay. You can see this screen that says here, how to shoot.
Yep, we see that.
Okay. One of the things that you can start to do immediately is go to Google. Stick in Google, what makes a good photograph? You'll come up with 5, 10, 15 different videos and examples. And one of the best that I have found is this one here. And if you can read at the top, it's an Apple video, and the URL is apple.com. Put in apple.com photography. You can see that URL, apple.com/iPhone photography. And what they've done is come up with all these different examples of how to use your camera. It goes way beyond what I can do here in an hour and a quarter, an hour and a half. If you want to know how to shoot with light and shadow, there is a marvelous video that will take you through this, and how to lock the focus and all the different steps as you go on. I'll go back on that. Let's see how I can get rid of that. And there are all of those. Now I lost what was it? Apple iPhone. If you go there, that one set of videos will take you through on how to use your iPhone, and those are also transferable to to almost any camera that you use. And these are just the subjects: how to search for photos, how to trim a video, how to shoot using the rule of thirds, how to shoot with stage light. All of these examples of what to do if you want to know how do you shoot with panoramic, how do you shoot a burst mode, how do you shoot in black and white. All these examples are there. How to experiment with framing, and the videos are very, very good. It takes you through, there it is, step by step with the image of your camera there. So it's very difficult to describe sometimes what composition is, but the examples that I was giving you were assignments that I happened to have that had a particular assignment, and they were using these elements of composition, so it lent itself to what today's lesson was.
Well, it is challenging. It's kind of like talking about music, or these are hard things to do. You have to appreciate them. So sharing your screen and sharing, and talking about it as we're looking at it together, I think is really helpful. So I encourage people to look and see, maybe for the next time, if people want to email me examples of art that they find particularly engaging, and maybe they don't even know why, or maybe they have something that they'd just love to hear, share something that's really special to them. I'd be happy to do that, because sometimes we can learn a lot just by looking at photos that we think are really striking and unique. So I'll send out an email, and
what I'm going to do next time is I'm going to show you, and they work. I'll use them that work on both the Android and the iPhone, on applications that you can download that are going to give you the post-production kinds of renditions that I've been using. Show you how to turn a picture into a watercolor that's really quite good.
Great. Well, that will be fun.
All right.
Thank you, Ron. This has been a lot to think about, and I think a lot of, we'll have to go and digest these ideas and go back to the beginning. We can watch this recording, think about the different rules and suggestions, and go and keep taking pictures. I think that's one of the best advices for any artist, is to go and just keep developing your eye, just keep practicing it. So
take your kids and put them in front of next to a window.
There you go. Not in direct sun.
Turn them to the side.
That's right. And no smiling. No smiling.
No smiling.
I'm going to have a hard time. I'm getting lots of thanks as well from everybody who's been watching. They, can't tell you themselves, but Ron, I just want to say thank you for everybody who's enjoyed the program tonight. People have really loved it. And it's coming in across both on here and out on YouTube.